In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at GDP, and that is a country's gross domestic product. This is one of the most important data points in an economy, and it leads to activity in the financial markets for many reasons. But along with inflation and labor market data, it plays a major role for the decision-making process for banks and governments. Hi, and welcome to the EIR show, and more specifically to the Economic Data Simplified series that I bring to you every week. And in this series, I'll talk about data releases that we see coming out each month. Of course, we'll be looking at these with particular focus on trading and investing, but this should all be helpful, even just for people wanting to know more about economics in general. Let's get started. So, what is GDP? GDP stands for the gross domestic product, and GDP represents the total monetary value of goods and services produced in an economy produced in a specific time frame, usually monthly, quarterly, or annually. Its measurement helps us to determine the size of the economy, and the changes in GDP will show us the rate that the economy is expanding or contracting. A recession is technically defined when an economy has had a fall in GDP over 2 consecutive quarters. So of course you can see how it is an important measure. Now, there are 3 ways that GDP is measured, and that is the expenditure approach, the income approach, and the output approach. But for now, we're just going to be focusing on the expenditure approach since it is the one that's most common. However, the approach used shouldn't make a significant difference since the outcomes should be similar. So let's explore how we calculate the GDP using the expenditure approach. We can use the following formula. GDP basically equals to consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus imports minus exports. However, if we intend to compare GDP between different periods, it is important that we consider inflation, which is the rise of the price of goods and services across an economy. And this is something I'm going to be delving far deeper into in an upcoming video on inflation in this series. So keep an eye out for that one. Now, there are 2 ways to consider GDP, and one is nominal GDP and the other real GDP. Nominal GDP is basically the price of goods and services, not taking into account inflation. Now, this may be misleading comparing an economy over time. For example, if GDP increased by 5%, let's say, and inflation increased by 5%, then the rise in GDP may not be necessarily showing growth in the economy. Instead, we may want to use real GDP, which is, of course, inflation adjusted. That way, if real GDP increases by 5%, we can be confident that this reflects genuine economic growth. Now, an expanding economy should lead to lower unemployment rates, as businesses will expand and consumers will have more money and confidence to spend, which is, of course, particularly important to an economy like the United States, where consumer spending accounts for about 70% of the economy. On the other hand, of course, a contracting economy may result in an increase in unemployment as well as fewer job opportunities, leading to reduced consumer confidence and, of course, increased savings and less spending. So let's take a closer look at the relationship between GDP and the economy. Now, for this example, I'm going to be using a simple diagram known as the circular flow of income. Okay, and I'm going to put that right here in the corner of your screen. This is basically a simplified model of the economy as a whole, and the main part of this model, as you can see here, includes what we call the inner flow. And what this shows us is the basic assumption that income circulates around the economy. Firms pay households in the forms of wages, dividends, etc., and households will in turn give the money back to the domestic firms when they, of course, consume domestic goods or services, which of course supports these firms, right? These companies. By the way, when I say domestic, I mean within the same country or economy. So this inner flow diagram here basically demonstrates that firms pay out all their money to households, and households in turn spend all their money with those same firms, resulting in this continuous flow of money. Now, there are some other things we do have to consider, okay? It's not as simple as it is or as it suggests. Despite the circular flow of income, things like withdrawals and injections can also occur. For instance, a household may decide to save some of their income, which would lead to a withdrawal from the inner flow and the money being deposited into a financial institution like a bank. Alternatively, the household may be taxed and the money is withdrawn from the inner flow and then transferred to the government. Similarly, companies may also withdraw by the inner flow by paying taxes, unless you're a particular coffee brand, or of course by retaining their earnings. Now, another type of withdrawal is through imports. Imports such as buying foreign goods or paying someone in another country. These all contribute to withdrawals from the inner flow, okay, or some examples of anyway. Now, of course, opposite to withdrawals, we have injections. This is where other sources outside the inner flow contribute funds into it. For example, a company may borrow money or receive outside investment, and this money may have originally come from households within the inner flow. And of course, that money is now being reinjected into it. For example, a company may borrow money or receive an outside investment, and this money may have come from households within the inner flow, and that money is now being reinjected into it. Alternatively, the government may spend money through government expenditure, of course using revenue raised from taxes that were initially withdrawn from the inner flow. Now, a final example could be export income acting as an injection, offsetting the withdrawal from income expenditure. So to summarize, withdrawals from the circular flow of income can come from savings, taxes, and imports, while injections can come from investment, government expenditure, and of course exports. Now, what this all means for GDP, gross domestic product, in basic terms, is if withdrawals exceed or are higher than injections, GDP will fall. While if withdrawals are lower than injections, of course, GDP will rise. This is really the basic relationship that you need to know about GDP. Now, as you continue to look at other economic data that is released month by month, week by week, you can always refer back to this video on what you understood about GDP. This will help you identify the connections and of course the cause and effect relationships between different economic data points, and knowing what it means for other economic data that's coming in the future and what it means to the markets and the economy. Using this information and knowledge that you know should just add a nice extra confidence that will better help you understand the markets and of course aid your trading and investing. So if you found this video and series helpful, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on any other videos in this series, as well as other content that I produce as well. The next video on economic data simplified will be coming out next week. So until then, I'll see you on the next one.